The Unexpected Return. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Westlake Memorial Hospital's East Wing as Dr. Vivian Rhodes adjusted her pristine white coat. First days always came with jitters, but this one felt different, more consequential somehow. After years of dedicated work at a small community hospital, she had finally secured a position at one of the most prestigious surgical departments in the country. Dr. Rhodes, a nurse with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, approached her. "I'm Nurse Patricia. The department meeting starts in 5 minutes. I can walk you there?" Vivian smiled gratefully. "Thank you. I was just trying to remember if it was the 3rd or 4th floor." "4th," Patricia replied with a knowing smile. "And fair warning, Dr. Thorne can be intimidating at first, but he's brilliant. Best surgical director we've ever had." As they walked, Vivian mentally reviewed her credentials, ready to make a good impression. Her specialty in cardiothoracic surgery had caught the attention of Westlake's recruitment committee, particularly her innovative approach to minimally invasive procedures. This opportunity meant everything to her. A fresh start after years of quiet dedication. The conference room buzzed with the energy of a dozen surgeons discussing cases, sipping coffee, and reviewing charts. Vivian slipped in quietly, taking a seat near the back. She scanned the faces, all unfamiliar except for Dr. Olivia Porter, whom she'd met during her interview. "Good morning, everyone," a deep voice called from the doorway, instantly silencing the room. Vivian's heart stopped. The man who strode confidently to the front of the room bore little resemblance to her memories. His once youthful face now carried the weathered lines of experience. His previously clean-shaven jaw now sported a neatly trimmed beard, and the warm chestnut hair she once ran her fingers through was now shorter, with flecks of silver at the temples. But those eyes, those intense hazel eyes that had once looked at her with such love, remained unchanged. It couldn't be him. Julian had disappeared 7 years ago, after being accused of fatal negligence during a high-profile surgery. The subsequent scandal had rocked the medical community and shattered her heart. He had vanished without a trace, leaving only a cryptic note. "The truth will find its way. I'm Dr. Samuel Thorne. For those who haven't had the pleasure," he announced, his gaze sweeping the room before landing momentarily on Vivian. A flicker of something, recognition, fear, passed over his face before his professional mask slipped back into place. "We have a new addition to our team today. Dr. Vivian Rhodes joins us from Pinecrest Regional. Her work in minimally invasive cardiac procedures has been quite remarkable." Vivian forced herself to stand on legs that threatened to buckle. "Thank you for the welcome, Dr. Thorne. I'm looking forward to contributing to Westlake's exceptional reputation." Their eyes met across the room, and for a suspended moment the years between them seemed to compress. Then he nodded curtly and continued with the meeting. The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Vivian diligently took notes, asked appropriate questions, and maintained her composure while her mind raced. Samuel Thorne was Julian Blackwood, she was certain of it. The way he held his pen, the slight tilt of his head when considering a complex case, the unconscious habit of touching his right eyebrow when concentrating. These weren't things that could be changed like a name or appearance. But why was he here, masquerading as someone else? What had happened during those 7 lost years? And most importantly, did he recognize her too? After the meeting, Vivian retreated to her new office, closing the door before leaning heavily against it. The photograph on her desk, her parents at their 40th anniversary, stared back at her. Her mother had always insisted that Julian was innocent, that someone with hands meant to heal couldn't possibly be responsible for such negligence. A soft knock startled her. She quickly composed herself before opening the door. "Dr. Rhodes." Samuel, no Julian, stood there, clinical and detached. "I'd like to observe your first procedure tomorrow." "The mitral valve repair for Mrs. Donovan." "Of course, Dr. Thorne," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. For a moment, his professional veneer cracked. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Your technique with the transapical approach was innovative in your published paper. I'm interested to see it firsthand." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving Vivian with the distinct feeling that tomorrow's observation would be about much more than surgical technique. The man she had once loved The man she had mourned was now her superior, hiding behind a different name. And somehow Vivian knew this was just the beginning of a truth 7 years in the making. Shadows of recognition. 3 weeks into her position at Westlake Memorial, Vivian had established a rhythm. Her surgeries went smoothly, her patients recovered well, and her colleagues respected her expertise. But working alongside Dr. Samuel Thorne had become an elaborate dance of professional courtesy and unspoken recognition. Today's surgery, a complex aortic dissection, had drawn an audience to the observation deck. As Vivian worked with practiced precision, she felt his eyes on her hands. "Clamp," she requested, and the scrub nurse placed it in her palm. Vivian applied it with the subtle twist and lock motion she'd developed years ago. From the corner of her eye, she saw Samuel shift forward slightly. It was a technique she'd learned from Julian during their residency. His signature move to prevent tissue damage during prolonged clamping. "Dr. Rhodes," his voice came through the intercom from the observation deck. "Consider bypassing that section entirely. The calcification extends further than the scans indicated." She paused, studying the exposed aorta. He was right, but how had he seen it from that distance? It was nearly imperceptible unless you knew exactly what to look for. She adjusted her approach, silently acknowledging his insight with a slight nod. After successfully completing the procedure, Vivian found herself alone in the scrub room with Samuel. "That adjustment you made?" he said quietly while scrubbing his hands, though he hadn't participated in the surgery. "Where did you learn that technique?" Vivian met his gaze in the mirror. From someone who understood that surgery is as much art as science. Someone who disappeared 7 years ago. His hands stilled momentarily before he resumed scrubbing with methodical focus. "Sounds like a valuable mentor." "He was more than that," Vivian replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Before Samuel could respond, the door swung open as Dr. Porter entered with urgency. "Multiple incoming traumas," she announced. "Bus collision on the highway. We need all hands." In the organized chaos that followed, Vivian found herself assigned to Trauma Room 3. The patient, a man in his 60s with severe chest injuries, was already deteriorating rapidly. "Pneumothorax and possible aortic rupture," the resident reported. "BP's dropping fast." As Vivian worked to stabilize him, she noticed the patient's unusual scarring, evidence of experimental heart surgery. When she opened his chest, she found a synthetic graft with a distinctive suturing pattern she'd only seen in one place. An article published 8 years ago by Julian Blackwood, just before the scandal that destroyed his career. "This patient had the Blackwood procedure," she murmured. Mostly to herself. "What was that, Dr. Rhodes?" asked the resident. Before she could respond, Samuel appeared beside her, having entered the trauma room unnoticed. "I'll take over," he said, his voice unnaturally tense. "You're needed in Trauma 1. "I've got this case stabilized," Vivian countered firmly. Samuel leaned closer, his voice dropping. "This patient was part of the Westcott pharmaceutical trial. The one that ended my—" He caught himself. "The one that ended Dr. Blackwood's career. He shouldn't be alive." The significance hit Vivian immediately. This patient was living proof that Julian's procedure worked, contrary to what the investigation had claimed. Why would someone frame Julian for a failed procedure if it actually succeeded? Later that evening, Vivian found herself in the hospital archives, searching for records from 7 years ago. The Westcott trial had been heavily publicized, an innovative approach to repair damaged heart valves using a synthetic material developed by pharmaceutical giant Westcott Industries. Late-night research? Samuel's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, his face partially shadowed. "Just curious about a certain disgraced surgeon," Vivian replied, turning to face him fully. "One who was accused of killing 4 patients with an experimental procedure, then vanished without a trace. Funny thing is, I just operated on a living patient who had that exact procedure." Samuel closed the door behind him and approached slowly. "That surgeon was set up by people with a lot to lose. The Westcott graft was defective, not the procedure. When he discovered evidence of falsified safety data, they made him disappear. And instead of fighting, he ran," Vivian challenged. The pain of abandonment surfacing. He had no choice. Samuel replied, his professional facade cracking. They threatened his family, his colleagues, the woman he loved. So he changed his identity, worked in clinics across Sudan and Ethiopia, perfecting techniques where no one would look for him, until he could return with enough evidence to clear his name. Vivian stepped closer. "Julian," she whispered. For a moment, he looked as though he might deny it. Then his shoulders sagged slightly. "I never thought I'd see you again, Viv, especially not here." 7 years without a word, she said, her voice catching. "I thought you were dead." "Sometimes I wished I was," he admitted. "But the thought of clearing my name, of coming back to you, kept me going." Before Vivian could respond, her pager beeped urgently. Emergency surgery. Her trauma patient was crashing. "This conversation isn't over," she said, already moving toward the door. Julian nodded. "Be careful with that patient's records. People at Westcott would kill to keep that evidence buried. They nearly did once before." As Vivian hurried toward the OR, her mind raced with implications. Julian was alive. He'd been framed. And now, fate had brought them together just as evidence of the conspiracy was literally lying on her operating table. The question was, who at Westlake might still be working for Westcott, and how far would they go to protect their secret? The breaking storm. The emergency alert system blared through Westlake Memorial at 3:17 a.m. A chemical plant explosion had sent dozens of critically injured workers flooding into the ER. Vivian, who had been catching a brief nap in the on-call room, rushed to the emergency department to find organized chaos. Multiple chemical burns, blast injuries, and inhalation traumas, Dr. Porter announced to the assembled team. "Dr. Thorne will coordinate surgical teams. Dr. Rhodes, you'll handle the cardiothoracic cases." For the next 14 hours, Vivian worked without pause, moving from one operating room to another. Sometime during the 6th hour, Julian joined her. Their hands working in silent, perfect synchrony on a patient with shrapnel embedded dangerously close to the heart. "Forceps," Julian requested, and Vivian anticipated his need before the scrub nurse could react, placing them directly in his hand. Their fingers brushed, a brief moment of connection amid the sterility. "Just like Mercy General," he murmured, referencing the hospital where they'd completed their residencies together. "Except back then, you were Julian Blackwood," Vivian replied quietly, ensuring only he could hear. His eyes met hers over their surgical masks. "I still am." They continued working in tandem, their unspoken communication transcending the years of separation. It wasn't until the early evening, when the crisis had finally stabilized, that they found themselves alone in the doctor's lounge. Exhausted, Vivian sank onto the couch, accepting the coffee Julian offered. "I need to know everything," she said simply. Julian sat beside her, close enough for comfort but maintaining a respectful distance. The Westcott trial was supposed to revolutionize heart valve repair. The company stood to make billions. I was the lead surgeon, chosen because of my innovative techniques. "I remember," Vivian nodded. "You were so excited about helping patients with inoperable conditions." "The first few surgeries went perfectly," Julian continued. "But then patients started developing complications, clotting issues that shouldn't have happened. I ran independent tests on the material and discovered it had been altered from the version that passed initial safety trials." He rubbed his face wearily. "When I brought my findings to the hospital board, I was told to keep quiet. The next day, 4 patients died simultaneously. Patients I had operated on months earlier who were recovering well. The official report claimed my surgical technique caused delayed fatal complications." "But that's impossible," Vivian objected. "Those procedures were textbook perfect. I assisted on 2 of them." "Exactly. Someone tampered with their medications to induce fatal clotting. But before I could prove it, an ethics complaint was filed. My surgical privileges were suspended. Then I received a phone call warning me that if I didn't disappear, others would suffer, specifically mentioning you, my parents, everyone I cared about." Vivian leaned forward. "So you ran?" "I had 24 hours to vanish," Julian confirmed. "I created the identity of Samuel Thorne and fled to Africa, working with Doctors Without Borders while gathering evidence against Westcott. I documented every successful case using my technique with proper materials, building a record to prove my procedure wasn't flawed. And now you're back, Vivian said. Why Westlake? Why risk exposure? Because Dr. Henrietta Westcott, the company founder's daughter, is on the board here, Julian explained. She was behind the cover-up. I needed access to the hospital records from that period, records that mysteriously disappeared from the medical board's investigation. Vivian processed this information slowly. The patient from the bus accident? He had your procedure with the original unaltered material, didn't he? Julian nodded. He was part of the initial trial group before they changed the composition to cut costs. His continued survival is living proof that my technique works perfectly with proper materials. Then we need to protect him, Vivian said decisively. And find those records. Julian's expression darkened. It's dangerous, Viv. These people almost destroyed me once. I can't let them hurt you too. They already did, she replied softly. They took you away from me for 7 years. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the professional barriers between them dissolved completely. I never stopped loving you, Julian admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Even when I couldn't be Julian Blackwood anymore, I carried you with me. Before Vivian could respond, the lounge door opened, and Dr. Porter entered with another doctor Vivian recognized as a board member, Dr. Franklin Westcott. Henrietta's cousin. Dr. Thorne, there you are, Franklin said smoothly. The board is quite impressed with how you handled today's crisis. We're discussing a permanent promotion to surgical director. Julian's face revealed nothing. That's very flattering. Yes, well, Franklin's gaze shifted to Vivian with calculated assessment. Great surgeons deserve recognition. By the way, I heard about your interesting trauma case from the bus accident. I'd like to review the file personally. Patient confidentiality, Vivian replied evenly. Unless you're on his care team, I'm afraid that won't be possible without proper authorization. Something cold flashed in Franklin's eyes before his professional smile returned. Of course, just professional curiosity. Well, I'll leave you two to recover from your heroics today. After he left, Julian and Vivian exchanged knowing glances. They know, Julian said quietly. Then we need to move quickly, Vivian replied, standing up. Because I didn't survive 7 years without you just to lose you again. Unearthing truth. The rhythmic beeping of monitoring equipment provided a backdrop as Vivian checked on her patients from the mass casualty event. When she reached the room of Martin Holloway, the bus accident survivor with Julian's procedure, she found Julian already there, reviewing his chart. His latest scans confirm what I suspected, Julian murmured as she entered. The original Westcott graft is still functioning perfectly after 8 years. The material they used in the initial trials was actually superior to anything on the market today. So why change it? Vivian asked, checking Holloway's IV line. Cost, Julian replied grimly. The original polymer was expensive to produce. Henrietta Westcott found a cheaper alternative that looked identical in preliminary tests, but deteriorated rapidly in the body. Rather than restart trials with the new material, they falsified compatibility data. Vivian frowned. We need documented proof. I've been searching for months, Julian admitted. But then you arrived, and suddenly one of my original patients appears in your OR. It can't be coincidence. No, agreed a weak voice from the bed. Martin Holloway's eyes were open, alert despite his condition. Not coincidence. I've been looking for you, Dr. Blackwood. Julian tensed, glancing toward the door. Mr. Holloway, I think you're confused. Save it, the older man interrupted. I recognized your technique when they showed me my surgical scans. I was a medical engineer before retiring. I know who saved my life 8 years ago. Vivian moved closer. Mr. Holloway, what do you mean you've been looking for him? After the scandal, I knew something wasn't right. My heart was perfect while others died. I started investigating. He reached for the water cup, which Vivian helped him with. I worked for a competing medical device company. I had resources, contacts. I've spent years gathering evidence about what Westcott did. Julian's eyes widened. What kind of evidence? Internal emails, altered trial data, financial records showing the material substitution, Holloway explained. It's all stored on an encrypted drive. When I heard rumors that Dr. Samuel Thorne at Westlake matched descriptions of the vanished Dr. Blackwood, I manufactured a reason to be your patient. The bus accident was unfortunate timing. Where is this drive now? Vivian asked urgently. Safety deposit box. Keys in my personal effects. Holloway grimaced as he shifted position. Box 427, First National Bank downtown. But be careful. 2 days ago, someone tried to access my hospital records. Yesterday, my apartment was broken into. Julian and Vivian exchanged alarmed glances. I'll request a security detail for his room, Vivian said. We'll get the drive tomorrow morning. But as they left Holloway's room, they found Dr. Franklin Westcott waiting, his artificial smile firmly in place. Dedicated doctors. Checking on patients so late, he observed. I wonder, Dr. Thorne, if we could discuss your history with Doctors Without Borders. The board is quite interested in your international experience. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Of course, Julian replied smoothly. Tomorrow, perhaps? I insist on tonight, Franklin countered. My office. 30 minutes. After he departed, Julian turned to Vivian. He's keeping me occupied while someone else moves on Holloway or the evidence. You need to get that drive now. That's exactly what he expects, Vivian argued. It's probably a trap. Julian took her hand, a rare public display of their connection. I've spent 7 years in the shadows, Viv. I can handle Franklin. But that evidence is our only chance to end this. In the end, they compromised. Julian would meet with Franklin while Vivian gathered trusted colleagues, Dr. Porter and Nurse Patricia, both of whom had expressed suspicions about the Westcotts' influence at the hospital. The bank was closed, but Patricia's son worked security there and arranged emergency access due to potential medical information needed for a critical patient. While Julian kept Franklin distracted with fabricated stories of African clinic procedures, the women retrieved the encrypted drive from Holloway's safety deposit box. Back at the hospital, in Dr. Porter's locked office, they reviewed the damning evidence. Internal Westcott emails explicitly discussed the material substitution, with Henrietta Westcott writing, Blackwood is becoming problematic. He's noticed the polymer change. Suggest we implement contingency plan before he takes his concerns public. Another email, dated the day before the patient deaths, instructed a lab technician to adjust anticoagulant levels in the Blackwood trial patients and ensure nothing can be traced back to us. This is enough to reopen the investigation, Dr. Porter said. Stunned by the blatant corporate malfeasance, Vivian's phone buzzed with a text from Julian. Franklin suspicious. Bringing security to Holloway's room. Meet me there. When Vivian arrived, she found Julian facing off against Franklin Westcott and 2 security guards outside Holloway's door. I'm simply concerned about patient safety, Franklin was saying. This man requires specialized care at our cardiac center across town. At midnight? Without his attending physician's approval? Julian challenged. Vivian stepped forward. Any patient transfer requires my signature, Dr. Westcott, as Mr. Holloway's surgeon of record. Franklin's composed facade cracked slightly. This is a board decision, Dr. Rhodes. I suggest you comply if you value your position here. I value my patients more, Vivian replied, noticing Dr. Porter and Nurse Patricia approaching with hospital security. And as it happens, we've just submitted some fascinating documents to the Hospital Ethics Committee, the Medical Licensing Board, and the District Attorney's Office. Franklin's face drained of color. What documents? Julian straightened to his full height, dropping the subservient demeanor he'd maintained for months. Evidence that Westcott Pharmaceuticals knowingly used defective materials in heart valve procedures, then murdered 4 patients to cover it up when I discovered their fraud. As hospital security escorted a protesting Franklin away, Julian turned to Vivian, his expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. It's over, he said quietly. After 7 years, it's finally over. Vivian took his hand. No, Julian. After 7 years, it's finally beginning. Healing hearts. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Westlake Memorial's largest conference room, illuminating the faces of the hastily assembled hospital board. News of Franklin Westcott's arrest had spread rapidly, and an emergency meeting had been called to address the crisis. Julian stood at the center of the storm, his false identity now openly acknowledged. "Let me understand this correctly," said Dr. Eleanor Hammond, the board chairwoman. "You are actually Julian Blackwood, the surgeon who disappeared 7 years ago after being accused of fatal negligence?" "Yes," Julian confirmed, his voice steady. "I assumed the identity of Samuel Thorne to protect myself and others while gathering evidence of the conspiracy against me." Henrietta Westcott, who had been summoned from a conference in Europe, sat rigidly at the far end of the table. "These are preposterous accusations. My family's company has an impeccable record of ethical pharmaceutical development." "The evidence suggests otherwise," Vivian interjected, sliding copies of Holloway's documents across the table. "Internal emails clearly show your direct involvement in substituting inferior materials, falsifying safety data, and, most damning, deliberately causing the deaths of 4 patients to discredit Dr. Blackwood when he discovered the fraud." Murmurs rippled through the assembled board members as they reviewed the documents. Henrietta's attorney leaned forward. "These could easily be fabricated. My client categorically denies any wrongdoing." "Martin Holloway is prepared to testify," Julian countered, "as are 17 other surviving patients from my original trial group who received the proper materials before the substitution. Their ongoing health contradicts every claim made against my surgical technique." Dr. Hammond studied Julian thoughtfully. "Why come to Westlake under false pretenses? Why not take this evidence directly to the authorities?" "Because key hospital records disappeared during the original investigation," Julian explained. "Records that showed my patients' blood work had been normal hours before they suddenly died. I needed access to the backup archives, which, coincidentally, only board members like Dr. Westcott could access." The hospital's legal counsel cleared his throat. "Those records were indeed accessed 3 months ago by Dr. Westcott, supposedly for a research project." All eyes turned to Henrietta, whose composure finally cracked. "The Blackwood procedure was going to ruin us. His technique required expensive materials that would have cut our profits by 60%. The board was breathing down my neck about quarterly projections. I had no choice." Her attorney frantically tried to silence her, but Henrietta had already incriminated herself. As security escorted her from the room, Julian felt 7 years of tension begin to release from his shoulders. The hearing continued for hours, with Julian recounting his years in exile, the threats against his loved ones, and his careful plan to clear his name. By afternoon, the board had voted unanimously to reinstate his medical credentials and issue a public statement acknowledging the grave injustice he had suffered. Later, in the hospital garden where they had retreated for a moment of privacy, Vivian found Julian staring thoughtfully at the setting sun. "What happens now?" she asked, joining him on the stone bench. "The district attorney wants my testimony," he replied. "There will be trials, media coverage, probably civil suits against Westcott Pharmaceuticals." "I meant with us," Vivian clarified softly. Julian turned to face her, truly unguarded for the first time since their reunion. "7 years ago, I left everything behind, my career, my home, my name. But losing you was the wound that never healed." "You could have told me," Vivian said, the old pain surfacing briefly. "I would have waited, helped somehow." "They were watching you," Julian explained. "For months after I disappeared, they monitored your movements, your phone calls. I couldn't risk your safety." He reached for her hand, his touch tentative. "Every successful surgery in those remote clinics, every life I saved, I did it thinking of you, hoping someday I'd find my way back." "And now you have," Vivian acknowledged, interlacing her fingers with his. "I have no right to ask anything of you," Julian continued. "You've built a life without me, established your career." "A career that brought me here," Vivian interrupted. "To this hospital at this time with the one patient who could exonerate you. Some might call that coincidence. I call it fate." Julian's expression softened. "What are you saying, Viv?" "I'm saying that second chances don't come often in life," she replied. "And I'm not willing to waste this one wondering what might have been." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the new lines that 7 hard years had etched there. "The Julian I loved would never have given up fighting for the truth. And he didn't. He just fought differently than I expected." I'm not the same man you knew, Julian warned. Those years changed me. They changed me too, Vivian acknowledged. But some things remain constant, like North Stars to navigate by. Julian smiled then, the first genuine smile she'd seen since recognizing him. Such as? Such as the way your eyes still crinkle when you're trying not to smile, Vivian observed. The way you still tap your thumb twice before making an incision. The way my heart still recognizes yours across time and distance. Julian drew her closer. I have no practice name anymore. No certain future. The media will turn this into a circus. Are you sure you want to be part of that story? Vivian laughed softly. Julian, I've been part of this story since the beginning. I'm certainly not leaving before we reach the epilogue. 3 months later, they stood together on the steps of the courthouse after the final testimony in the Westcott trial. The media had indeed swarmed around the case, dubbing it the heartbreak conspiracy, but public opinion had firmly supported Julian as the whistleblower who had sacrificed everything to protect patients. Westlake Memorial had offered Julian the position of chief of cardiothoracic surgery, which he had accepted on the condition that his innovative procedure, now vindicated by extensive review, would be taught to a new generation of surgeons. Ready to go home? Vivian asked, taking his hand as they navigated through the reporters. Julian nodded, the weight of the past finally lifting from his shoulders. Home, he repeated, the word carrying new meaning. For 7 years, I didn't allow myself to imagine having that again. Well, you better start imagining it, Vivian replied with a mischievous smile, because I've already started planning where to put your books. As they walked away from the courthouse, Julian reflected on the unexpected path that had brought him back to everything he had lost. His name was cleared, his work vindicated, and most miraculously, the love he thought forever sacrificed had found its way back to him. Some wounds, it seemed, were meant to heal after all, especially those of the heart.